Welcome to Your Life As, where you get to live the life of someone from history, minus the awkward battles, bad decisions, and serious consequences. Experience the glory, the drama, and the excitement, but skip all the hard stuff. We're talking about the perks, the power, and none of the hassle. Each week you'll step into the past and live a legendary life, without worrying about the messy details. So buckle up, hit subscribe, and get ready to live the life without the headaches. Welcome to Your Life as Cleopatra, Queen of Ptolemaic Egypt. You think you want to be me? First of all, let's get this straight. You think you want to be a queen, right? You imagine the glittering gowns, the endless feasts, the regal stature, the influence. But do you really though? You think you can handle it when your entire nation's survival depends on whether or not you can keep two of the world's most powerful men from tearing each other apart? Let me break it down for you. It's a mess, a beautiful chaotic mess, a disaster with a crown. You get to sleep in a golden bed, but you don't sleep well. Ever? Let's start with the royalty part. Do you know what it feels like to have every day of your life planned out by the whims of ancient politics? To be born into a royal family that's barely hanging on by a thread, constantly fighting for control? They don't tell you that being born into privilege doesn't mean you get anything handed to you. I was just a kid tossed around like a piece of property with a crown that never really felt mine. But don't worry, I had to claw my way into some power mostly by outliving my siblings. It's not as glamorous as it sounds, just constant bloody scheming. But hey, I'll give you this. I figured out the power game faster than anyone expected. I was sharp. I was strategic. But let's not pretend I wasn't lucky as hell. At one point, my brother and I were supposed to share the throne. That didn't last long, because he was an idiot. And like any good royal family drama, we had some personal differences. In other words, I had him removed. Yes, I did that. When you're in charge, sometimes you just have to make the hard calls. Not that anyone will tell you that. They'll just focus on my good looks and the men I took to bed. Now let's talk about those men, shall we? Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. The men who ruined me. The men who became the centerpiece of the Cleopatra myth. They never tell you how much I hated that. Oh sure, I got some leverage by playing the mysterious alluring woman card. I used my looks, my charm, my intelligence. I used whatever I could to get into the position I needed. But let me tell you something. It's exhausting. But let me tell you about the fun part. The public. The people who loved me, or so I thought. They worshipped me for a while. They adored the idea of this powerful, seductive queen. And for a moment, I was their goddess. But it's funny, isn't it? How quickly a queen can become a joke. I wasn't their ideal. I wasn't the pure, untouchable image of royalty that they had in their heads. I was a real woman. A woman who had to survive, who made hard choices. And that's where the myth starts to crack. I'm not this perfect figure. I was a woman trying to hold it all together with threads made of broken alliances, betrayal, and broken hearts. You see, they thought they could reduce me to a love affair, a romance. That's what they turned me into, a tragic figure who's remembered for who she slept with, not for the empires she nearly tore apart. They think they can sum up my life in one sentence. Cleopatra, the woman who brought down two mighty men with nothing but a smile and some eyeliner. But that's where they're wrong. That's where the true misunderstanding begins. You want to be me, you want the fame, the myth, the legacy. At the end of the day, I didn't die in a way that's worth remembering. No heroic death. No glorious end. Just a mess. A tragedy, really. But that's the problem with being remembered. No one remembers the reality. They only remember the pretty parts. And let's face it, I was pretty damn good at making things look pretty. So no, you don't want to be me. Not when you see the truth behind the crown. Not when you understand the weight of it. I lived in a palace, but it was made of sand. And it was just a matter of time before it crumbled. You think you're ready for that? You think you want the power, the legacy, the endless string of lovers, the intrigue. Fine. But when you finally see what's left of me, you'll wish you had stayed in the crowd. The irony of my origin. Let's rewind a little, shall we? You want to know how I got to this gilded cage of a life? Let me take you back to the real origin story. The part no one really talks about. Spoiler alert, it wasn't all magic and royal bloodlines. Nope, it was messy. Like, really messy. But here's where the plot thickens. I was born into this mess as one of 3 siblings, each one of us vying for the title of next idiot to sit on the throne. Think of us like royal siblings on a reality show, except nobody's voting to get us out. It was also my first real encounter with power. Do you know how intoxicating it is to know that a bunch of people are looking at you, waiting for you to make decisions that could change the fate of an entire empire? Let me tell you something, it feels like crap. It's a constant headache. Everyone is talking behind your back, and you're trying to remember who's actually on your side. You've got advisors, courtiers, and the general public, all pulling you in different directions. And guess who had to smile through it all? Me. With the makeup, the smiles, the fake courtesies. I wasn't a ruler. I was a glorified puppet with a crown on my head, and the strings were always in someone else's hands. And then there was that other thing, my beauty. Ugh. Sure, let's talk about it. Everyone who's ever spoken about me seems obsessed with the idea that I was some kind of mesmerizing beauty, the woman who could melt the hearts of men and make them do whatever I wanted. Let's be clear here. I was no goddess. I was smart, strategic, and okay, maybe I had a bit of charm. But beauty? Really? Let's just say the ancient world had different standards. Seriously. I wasn't sitting there waiting for men to fall at my feet. I was busy trying to make sure my empire didn't collapse around me. Everyone from history books to Instagram comments will go on and on about how men fell in love with me, and it sounds so romantic, doesn't it? But the truth is, I wasn't some innocent seductress just swept away by the tides of love. Oh no no no. I used those men to stay alive. It was a business deal in the guise of romance. Julius Caesar? He wasn't my lover. He was my political ally. And Mark Antony? Well, he was the same. He was just another strategic partner to keep my throne secure while I played the part of the loving queen. If you ask me, history turned out to be a lot more Game of Thrones than fairy tale romance. So there you have it. Born into chaos, survived a bloody family feud, and started my reign with nothing but a bloody coup and a head full of ambition. It wasn't the magical fairy tale everyone seems to think it was. It was a blood-stained, cunning battle for survival. But here I am, Queen of Egypt. Or well, at least, that's what history tells you. I'll say this. There was no golden childhood for me. No perfect little princess in the making. What I had was one hell of a survival instinct. Because in the end, that's what royalty really is, isn't it? Surviving. But surviving doesn't mean thriving. And trust me, no one survives this life without a few scars. You just can't see them in the portraits. The rise that shouldn't set have worked. Okay, let's talk about my rise to power, shall we? You know that glamorous story about how Cleopatra, the goddess of Egypt, charmed the pants off Julius Caesar and, later, Mark Antony? Yeah, that story. The one where I'm painted as this dazzling beauty who wielded nothing but her looks to get ahead in the cutthroat world of ancient politics. Sounds like a fun fairy tale, doesn't it? If by fun fairy tale you mean a bunch of pure, unadulterated bullshit. Because that's exactly what it is. The truth is a bit more messy, and a whole lot less flattering. I didn't rise to power because I was some unearthly beauty, despite what everyone tells you. I didn't saunter into Caesar's camp and captivate him with my pretty face. That's not how it worked. If anything, I was a political survivalist with a set of skills no one was ready for. Sure, the whole "I'm a queen, I'll seduce you and get what I want" narrative is cute, but it's not how empires are built. Emperors and kings don't fall for a pretty face unless it comes with some serious leverage behind it. And let me tell you, I had leverage, but it wasn't my lips that got me what I wanted, it was my mind. Let's not forget that Egypt was barely holding on by a thread when I stepped onto the scene. My brother, the current co-ruler of Egypt, remember him? The one I offed earlier in the story, was a mess. A clueless puppet of the Roman Senate, and those Romans, well, they were a bunch of debt collectors masquerading as empire builders. They were sitting there on my doorstep, waiting for me to either bend over or, die in some dramatic, bloody battle. The only choice I had was to show up and prove I could play their game better than they could. And play the game I did. When I first met Julius Caesar, I wasn't some naive little princess trying to make him my lover. No, I wasn't even trying to charm him. I was trying to survive. At that point, Egypt's throne was a sinking ship, and my survival depended on whether I could convince Caesar that he needed me. So I did what any smart person would do. I made sure he saw me as a tool, not just some side piece in a royal harem. So I marched into his camp with my army, literally rolled up in a rug, yes, a rug, and threw myself at his feet, figuratively of course. I didn't even give him a choice. He had no idea what hit him. After Caesar's assassination, I thought I was done. I thought the world would move on, leaving me behind as just another ancient queen who got her time in the spotlight. But nope, enter Mark Antony, the man who really thought he could save me. Or maybe he thought he was saving Egypt. I'm not sure, but let me tell you something. Mark Antony, he was a disaster. He was not the smart strategic general everyone thought he was. He had too much wine, too many women, and not enough ambition. If I had to sum him up in one word, it would be distracting. But here's the kicker. I needed him. Not because I wanted him, but because I needed him. Egypt's survival depended on whether I could align myself with his military might. So, once again I put on the charm, did some flattering, and we formed an alliance. Yes, another one. You'd think I would have learned by now, but no. I was still playing the game. Only this time I had to double down. And again it worked. It was my second chance, and I took it. It's funny, isn't it, how life can feel like one long game of whoever gets the most power wins. You think it's all about strategy and wit, but in reality, it's all about knowing who to attach yourself to and when.
And I was good at that. I was the queen of alliances.
But I wasn't the queen of love. So here I am, playing a dangerous game of chess where the stakes are death. Rome's got its hands around Egypt's throat, and I'm trying to make it all work. I rise because I'm smart. I rise because I don't feel. I rise because I'm willing to do whatever it takes. People like to paint me as some romantic figure who lived and died for the sake of love. But I'm not. I was never that. I didn't rise to power for love. I rose for survival. But it's funny. No one remembers survival when you're a queen. They only remember the romance. And here I am, the last one standing in a world of betrayal, love, and politics. The world thinks it's all glitz and glamour. They think it was my beauty, my wit, my charm. But let me tell you, I made it because I played the game better than anyone else. The rest, just lucky breaks. The people who rode my coattails. Ah, yes, let's talk about the people in my life. The ones who were more than happy to hitch their wagons to my star and pretend they had something to do with my success. These are the ones who stuck around like leeches, claiming credit for my rise, or worse, taking advantage of me at every possible turn. Everyone from loyal servants to the Roman Senate wanted a piece of Cleopatra, and trust me, they didn't care how they got it. First we have the ever-loyal Ptolemaic family. The same family I had to constantly outwit just to stay on the throne. My dear brother Ptolemy XIII, a genius in the sense that he could barely tie his own sandals, was supposed to be my partner in ruling. Key word, supposed to be. But guess who couldn't keep a simple throne under his bottom? Yeah, that's right, my brother. Not that I'm bitter or anything. I had to outsmart him. outlive him, and watch as he squirmed weak and foolish, trying to cling to power. Sure, let's blame it on the kid who had no idea what he was doing. The only thing he did well was lose, and I made sure he lost in style. But that's not the worst part. Oh no. That's where the rest of the family jumps in to help. You've heard of political alliances, right? The ones that sound all nice and clean in history books. Well, let me tell you about them in real life. They're disgusting. Then there's the advisors, the men and sometimes women who surrounded me like loyal dogs, pretending to be on my side when all they were really after was a cut of the throne. Off the most hilarious part, they would lecture me, give me advice, and act like they were the ones steering the ship, when all they were doing was hanging on to my coattails. These were the people who would suck up to me when they needed something. More land, more power, more control. But the second I made one wrong move, they'd be the first to throw me under the chariot wheels. Classic, right? The Roman Senate, though, don't even get me started. They were the worst. The power-hungry vultures who were more than happy to tell me how to run my own damn country. They were the kind of people who'd look at a successful ruler and think, you know, I bet we could make her our puppet. And for a time, I did let them think that. I'll give them credit for their cunning. But the second they thought they could run my show, that's when I pulled the rug out from under them. I played them like they played everyone else. I kept one eye on their moves, and another on my own survival. But don't get me wrong, the Romans never stopped trying to manipulate me, and they never stopped leeching off Egypt's wealth. They'd swing by for a visit, throw around a few political words, and expect me to just bow down to their power. And then we have Mark Antony, the man of the hour, for all of 5 minutes. Let's face it, Antony wasn't the brightest crayon in the box. He wasn't just a man in a toga with too much ambition. He was the perfect example of a man who thought his cocky attitude could get him anywhere. I saw him as just another pawn in my game. He was useful for a time, a good means to secure a military alliance and keep the Roman influence in check. But let's not pretend he was some brilliant strategist. Hell, his idea of strategy was getting drunk, throwing around some speeches, and hoping someone would follow him. And I did for a time, but I knew deep down he was just a tool. He just didn't know it yet. What's even more pathetic is that he thought he was using me. But who was really in control? I'll tell you, me. He didn't realize that while he was out on the battlefield, I was back in Alexandria playing my own Game of Thrones. His ego was the perfect vehicle for me to hitch my chariot to, and I knew exactly how to keep him in my pocket. He was just smart enough to think I was doing the same for him. But when he was at his most vulnerable, the moment everything started crumbling, guess who didn't pick up the pieces? That's right, Antony. Not that I didn't have my own plans in motion. I made sure my name would go down in history. His would only get remembered because he happened to be in the right place at the right time, and by right place I mean right next to me. Then there's Julius Caesar. Everyone loves to think we had this grand romance, right? That he came to Egypt, saw me, and fell head over heels. Oh, what a fairy tale. Fa. Caesar and I, we weren't lovers, we were partners, in the most political sense of the word. Sure, he had his own ambitions, but guess who was playing the long game, while everyone else was lost in the immediate? If I'm being honest, he wasn't much of a romantic, he was an opportunist. He saw me as an asset to the Roman Empire, and I saw him as an asset to my reign. It was a business arrangement, folks. He helped me solidify my power, and I gave him the Eastern resources he craved. It worked until it didn't. But the most amusing thing? The historians. These are the people who love to write about me like I was some oversexed, power-hungry seductress, when in reality, I was just another woman trying to survive in a world run by men. My fame, my legacy, was built on the backs of others who spun their own tales about my life. These are the same people who misunderstood me completely. It wasn't about love or beauty, not really. It was about the survival of Egypt, about keeping my people free from the yoke of Rome. But does anyone write that? No, they'd rather make me the seductress queen who loved all the wrong men. Oh, how they got it wrong. The Golden Era, aka Delusion City. Ah, the so-called Golden Era, the point where Cleopatra supposedly had it all. The empire, the lovers, the riches, the grandeur. The moment when I was supposedly untouchable, the shining queen of Egypt, whose name rang out across the ages. Sure, let's play along and pretend that this was the peak of my existence, where everything was just so perfect and glamorous. But let me tell you something, it was a circus, and I was both the ringmaster and the joke. You know how everyone likes to romanticize this period? The opulent feasts, the towering monuments, the extravagant robes. I was the epitome of luxury. Yeah, I was dripping in gold and pearls, reclining on couches piled with the finest linens, while people worshipped me as some kind of god. And you know what? It was all a distraction. It wasn't real. I had to keep up appearances, because in a world like mine, if you stopped pretending for even a second, the whole thing would come crashing down. People needed to believe that Cleopatra, the queen, was perfect. But I wasn't perfect. I was falling apart behind closed doors, just like everyone else who gets too drunk on power. Let's be clear here. The lavish parties, the exotic animals, the banquets.
It wasn't just about looking good for the public, it was about maintaining control.
People loved the spectacle.
I loved seeing the woman who could manipulate the likes of Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, but it was also about selling the illusion. If I didn't keep the lavishness up, if I didn't constantly flaunt the kingdom's wealth and power, there would have been nothing left for me to hold on to. It was a tightrope walk on the edge of a cliff, and I was doing it in stilettos.
Everyone loves to paint me as this visionary, this ruler who managed to bring Egypt back from the brink of ruin. They love the idea that I was this untouchable figure who navigated the treacherous world of Roman politics with ease. But it wasn't visionary, it was survival. Every single day was a battle, and every day I had to remind myself why I was still here. It wasn't because of some divine right, and it wasn't because I was the most brilliant ruler in history. No, I was still here because I played a dangerous game of manipulation, charm, and sheer bloody-minded determination. And then there was the power. Oh, the power. It felt intoxicating for a time. To have generals at your feet, to be the one who made decrees that could alter the course of nations. But do you want to know the truth? That power, it was fragile, and everyone around me, especially the men I surrounded myself with, wanted a piece of it. You think Antony loved me? Nah. He loved the idea of being the second most powerful man in the world, next to me. You think Caesar cared about me? They didn't love me, no matter how much they might have pretended to. They loved what I could give them. And I loved what they could give me. It was the perfect mutual exchange. But don't for a second think that it was pure. There was nothing pure about it. It was all part of the game. Part of the illusion. And behind every golden goblet, behind every lavish feast, was the overwhelming fear that this charade would end, that I would be exposed for what I truly was, a desperate woman, clinging to whatever scraps of power she could hold on to. Oh, and the temples. Let's talk about the temples. I was the great pharaoh, the woman who would rebuild Egypt's glory and erect monuments to her own divine magnificence. But what was I really doing? I was creating distractions. I was telling the world, look at these monuments, look at my power, but underneath, I was terrified that it would all come crashing down at any moment. What kind of ruler does that make me? A ruler who has to spend her entire reign constantly proving her worth, constantly assuring people that she's more than just a puppet queen. It was the golden era. All right, just not in the way people think, because all that glitters is not gold. Sometimes it's just a lot of rust and desperation under a fresh coat of paint. But don't worry, I kept the facade up, I kept the charade going, and the world? Well, they bought it, for a while. Ah, the inevitable downfall. You're waiting for it, aren't you? You've heard the stories. The tragic, inevitable end of Cleopatra, the mighty queen who had it all but lost it all. But here's the thing. It wasn't a single event that took me down. It wasn't one betrayal or one disastrous battle. Oh no, it was me. It was my own choices, my own hubris, my own desperate attempts to hold on to something that was always slipping through my fingers. It was my fatal flaw. You want to know what that flaw was? Perfectionism. The need to control everything. The obsession with always winning. That's what ruined me. The irony. I was the Queen of Egypt, the most powerful woman in the known world, but I couldn't even control my own fate. I was so convinced that I could manipulate everything around me, my lovers, my advisors, the gods themselves, that I forgot one crucial thing. I was only human, and humans, we break, we make mistakes, and that's exactly what I did. I thought I could have it all. I thought I could play both sides, keep Rome at bay, manipulate Caesar, manipulate Antony, make my own empire rise from the ashes of history. But in doing so, I failed to realize that I was constantly stretching myself too thin. Take Antony, for instance. Yes, I used him. Yes, I needed him. But as much as I hated to admit it, I couldn't control his downfall. Antony was weak. His power came from his desperation to defeat Octavian, to claim some kind of victory over the man who would eventually become the first emperor of Rome. He got so tangled in his own pride and in his failed military campaigns that by the time we were facing Octavian's forces, he was already defeated in spirit. But I couldn't save him. I tried so hard to keep him from sinking into the abyss. But I didn't realize that by trying to carry him I was sinking too. And that's when the cracks in the facade became too big to patch. Then of course there's the pride. You see, I didn't just make strategic moves anymore. I didn't just manipulate people into thinking I was untouchable. Somewhere along the way, I started believing my own hype. The people worshipped me. I was the Queen of Egypt, the goddess incarnate. I got so wrapped up in my own greatness that I thought I was immune to the consequences of my actions. I thought that if I made the right alliances, if I made the right speeches, if I simply acted like a goddess every second of the day, I could turn everything in my favor. But you can't cheat fate, no matter how hard you try. You can't bend history to your will forever. And when the cracks started showing, when Antony's defeat became inevitable, when Rome's war machine started grinding through our last defenses, I realized too late that I had reached the point of no return. My empire was falling apart, and all I could do was try to hold it together with the strength of my will, my charisma, my tricks. But it wasn't enough, and by the time I tried to stage my last act of defiance, to gather forces and fight, it was over. In the end, my fatal flaw wasn't Caesar.
It wasn't Antony. It wasn't Rome. It was me. It was the belief that I could always outsmart the world around me. I thought I could escape my inevitable fate, but instead, I spent my life running straight toward it.
You want to know the real tragedy? It wasn't the loss of power. It wasn't the fall from grace. It wasn't the fall from grace. It was a realizing at the last moment that I had always been fighting for the wrong thing. I fought to keep control, to preserve perfection, but in doing so, I lost everything that really mattered. I had everything I could ever want, but it was all smoke and mirrors. In the end, I was just one more woman crushed under the weight of her own delusions. And the real kicker? I couldn't even finish what I started. My empire, gone. My legacy, twisted and shattered. The two men who were supposed to define my story, both of them were lost to history, and I was just the footnote, the woman who couldn't even keep her lovers in line, let alone her own empire. In the end, it wasn't Antony's defeat that killed me. It wasn't the betrayal of the Senate. It was the weight of my own delusions. I had spent my entire life playing a dangerous game, believing I could control everything around me. And I was good at it. But you know what? No one is good enough to control fate. Not even Cleopatra. So there you have it. My great tragic flaw, the delusion that I could escape fate, that I could be perfect, that I could hold on to power forever. And that, my dear, is what ruined me. The public clown parade. By the time my reign crumbled into ruins, I became the ultimate spectacle, didn't I? You've heard the story Cleopatra, the once mighty queen, reduced to a tragic, ironic symbol of failure. The moment my empire started to disintegrate, the entire world went from treating me like a goddess to watching me as a public spectacle. And boy, was it a show. The memes of ancient Rome, the gossip of the ages, they loved it. You know what they say about watching a disaster unfold? How people love to stare at a train wreck as it happens. Well, that's what I became. I was the face of the downfall, the cautionary tale. Well, that's what I became. The sting. I wasn't just the victim of a doomed empire. No, I was also the one who had to become the punchline. And let's be honest, the punchline of history hurts. When the Roman Empire came knocking down my door, I thought I could hold my ground, but as the world around me shifted, I quickly became the object of mockery. You think people will feel sorry for you when you lose it all? Nope. Instead, they start pointing and laughing. In the ancient world, failure was entertainment. Every bad decision I made became fodder for the public's amusement. The very people who once hailed me as queen were now looking at me like some comic tragedy. And guess who was at the center of it? Me. I thought my charm could smooth over the cracks. I thought my beauty, my wit, and my regal presence would hold me together until the very end. But no. Instead, I found myself paraded through the streets of history like a walking, talking joke. How quickly the world can turn on you, right? One minute, you're the woman who bends empires to her will, and the next, you're the punchline of a story no one wants to hear anymore. You think I enjoyed the clown parade? I didn't. I wasn't standing tall as some tragic queen. No, I was falling in front of everyone. The Roman historians? The ones who immortalized my supposed seduction of Caesar and Antony? They didn't care about the intricacies of my reign, the politics I fought for, or the struggles I endured. No, they wrote about my failures. They reduced me to just another woman who couldn't handle the heat of power. I went from the ruler of Egypt to a historical footnote, a puppet of fate. They laughed at me. They mocked me. And why? Because my epic fall was just another Roman joke. They made me the joke. And guess who laughed? The whole damn world. I became the face of self-destruction. The wretched queen who allowed herself to fall for the charms of two powerful men who ultimately failed to secure Egypt's future. And don't even get me started on the imagery they loved to portray. You know the famous scene, right? The one where I supposedly took my own life in a dramatic moment of despair? Isn't it perfect? They couldn't just let me go out like a ruler.
Ooh!
They had to make my death a tragic, poetic moment. But it wasn't poetry. It was desperation. I thought, in that moment, I could control my exit. I thought I could go out like a queen, dignified, poised, powerful. But what did history do? It turned me into a sideshow attraction, a symbol of what happens when you take too much love, too much ambition, too much power. And that's the thing with history. They don't remember you as you truly were. They remember you as the narrative that suits them best. They want a story, not a truth. They want a show, and they got one with me. So while I lay there in the throes of death, watching my empire crumble and my legacy go up in flames, the world saw a grand spectacle. The downfall of Cleopatra, the queen who had it all, reduced to a figure of pity and ridicule. They saw my beauty, my allure, and they turned it into a circus act. It wasn't just my power that slipped away, it was my dignity. And who was there to laugh? Everyone. Everyone. Except me. As I stood there trying to save my own skin, the world was already writing its version of my final chapter. They didn't see a queen. They saw a woman who had failed. They didn't see my struggles, my sacrifices, my intelligence. They just saw a face, and that face became the punchline. A woman who couldn't outsmart the gods. That sits the real tragedy. I gave them everything. My empire, my loyalty, my love, and what did they give me back? She made mockery. I didn't even get a dignified death. I got a public clown parade. My enemies, real or imagined. Now let's talk about my enemies, the ones who were real and the ones I convinced myself were after me. Because let me tell you something, when you're at the top, everyone's your enemy. It doesn't matter how much you try to play the diplomatic game. It doesn't matter how many alliances you form, or how many men you manipulate. Eventually you start seeing enemies everywhere. And when the walls begin to close in on you, you start imagining them in every shadow. But are they real? Or are you just looking for someone to blame? Let's start with the obvious ones. Rome. Oh, you want to talk about the people who truly wanted me dead? You can't talk about me without talking about Octavian. The guy who would eventually become Augustus, the first emperor of Rome. And the man who didn't hesitate to finish what Julius Caesar started. See, the thing is, Octavian wasn't just trying to conquer Egypt, he was trying to rewrite the rules of the game. I was the last major barrier to his dream of a united empire, and for that he needed to eliminate me. No diplomacy, no truce, just eliminate the threat. But was it just Octavian? No, it was everyone. Every Roman politician, every senator, every advisor who wasn't a part of my camp. Rome didn't just want to control Egypt, they wanted to control everything. They were looking at me as this dangerous, unpredictable woman who had the power to challenge everything they'd worked for. After all, I wasn't just a queen, I was a woman with power. In their eyes, I was a freak show. A woman who had the audacity to manipulate the might of Rome, the nerve. And when they saw that I had a little something that could fight back my alliances with Caesar and Antony, they thought, let's bring her down before she brings us down. They were right to be worried. If I had been given the chance, if I had been smarter, I could have secured Egypt's place in history for centuries. But no, they couldn't see beyond their own egos. They saw me as a threat, not just to their empire but to their very idea of what it meant to be in power. Now that's where I made my first mistake. I underestimated how many of my enemies weren't external. Sure, Octavian wanted me gone, but it wasn't just his soldiers who brought me down. It was the people around me. The ones who were supposed to be my allies. The ones who told me everything I wanted to hear while stabbing me in the back. I'm talking about my own court. My advisors. The very people who claimed to serve me. Do you want to know who really crippled me? The ones who whispered in my ear, telling me what I wanted to hear, until I started to believe it. The ones who let me fall deeper and deeper into delusion. The ones who saw me falter but didn't dare speak up because they were too busy trying to profit off my fall. They weren't just serving Egypt, they were serving themselves, and when it became clear that I was running out of options, they all went quiet. Not one of them had the guts to stand up for me when I needed them most. That's the true betrayal. But then there were the imagined enemies, the ones I saw in every shadow, the ones I created to justify my own paranoia. You want to talk about the mental toll of power? The moment you start looking over your shoulder every second, wondering if your closest allies are plotting against you, you've lost the game. I became consumed by fear. Fear that Mark Antony would turn on me. Fear that I wasn't good enough. Fear that everyone I trusted was just waiting for the right moment to stab me in the back. In the end, I had to ask myself, was it the Romans who destroyed me, or was it just me? Losing control of my own empire. I wanted to blame Octavian. I wanted to blame my lovers. But I know now that I was my own worst enemy. The real war wasn't with them, it was with my own mind. I became so consumed with the idea that everyone was out to get me that I couldn't see the truth. I couldn't see that it was already too late. By the time I realized that my own paranoia had clouded my judgment, it was over. No amount of manipulation or alliances could save me from myself. And in the end, I didn't just lose to Octavian. I lost to the fear of being abandoned, or the fear of failure, or the fear of being irrelevant in a world that was moving on without me. Maybe, just maybe, I could have handled Rome, but I couldn't handle myself. That was my real enemy. My comeback that wasn't sit. I wish I could say that I had some grand scheme, some brilliant master plan to turn things around. But the truth is, I was out of tricks. I had no more moves left. But that doesn't stop a queen from trying, does it? Especially when she's backed into a corner, with nothing left to lose but her pride. So what did I do? I made one last desperate gamble. I threw everything I had into one final attempt to secure my place, to save Egypt, and to make sure the name Cleopatra would go down in history as more than just a tragic figure. And of course, it was a disaster. A comedic disaster at that. You'd think I'd learned my lesson by then, right? That I'd figured out that the game was over. That no matter how much I tried to manipulate the fates, there was nothing left but to accept the inevitable. But no. My ego, my pride, my desperate need to win, pushed me forward, and I threw all my chips into the ring one last time. You see, after Antony's defeat, and after Octavian had practically claimed everything that was mine, I still thought there was a sliver of hope, a final card to play. I thought, if I could just get one more victory, one more alliance, I could take back control of Egypt and wipe the slate clean. So I threw myself into one last desperate attempt, the naval battle at Actium. It was supposed to be my moment, the one where I and Antony could defeat Octavian and his forces and reclaim the throne that was rightfully mine. But spoiler alert, we lost, and we lost badly. The most embarrassing defeat, one for the history books, no less. How did I, Cleopatra, the one who outwitted so many, fail so spectacularly? The answer is simple: hubris. I thought I could win because I had the best plans, the best alliances, the most power. But I forgot one thing sometimes. You can have all the strategy in the world, but if the universe wants you to fail, it's going to let you. In the end, what did I get out of this grand comeback attempt? Nothing. I lost Antony, not just in the battle, but emotionally. We were both defeated, both humiliated. He committed suicide in despair after the loss. And I? Well, I took my own life too. It wasn't the glorious final act I had imagined. It wasn't the triumphant return to power that I'd spent my whole life dreaming of. It was an anticlimax, a sad, quiet end, full of shame and regret. But that's the funny part, right? How we all think we can make a comeback when we're deep in the hole. You'd think the greatest queen of Egypt would have some final magnificent act of defiance, a triumph, a battle, a speech that would leave the world in awe. In my final moments, I realized that my so-called comeback was never about saving Egypt, about proving my worth. It was about proving something to myself. It was about the desperate need to make a statement before the world could write my story for me. But in the end, no one writes their own comeback. The universe writes it for you. The universe had already decided what kind of end I would have, and all I could do was play my part. My final act, a quiet death. A once proud ruler who had nothing left to give but her final breath. What did I gain from all my efforts? All my battles, all my alliances and betrayals? Nothing. No legacy, no empire. Just a face in history. The once great Cleopatra, reduced to nothing but a symbol of what happens when ambition, love, and power go wrong. So that was my comeback. Oh joke, oh disaster, oh sad, pathetic end to a life that I spent trying to prove something I could never prove, that I could survive, that I could win. But in the end, the universe took that away from me too. And that's the truth of it, isn't it? I can't control everything. You can't make a comeback when it's already over, and no amount of royal power, no army, no charm can ever change that. In the end, my so-called comeback wasn't just about saving Egypt. It was about saving my pride, and that, my dear, is where I lost everything. The end I earned. Ah, the end. You've been waiting for this, haven't you? The dramatic finale, the curtain closing on Cleopatra's reign. You'd think it would be grand, a spectacular death worthy of a queen, a final bow, a last defiant act, a legacy that would echo through the ages, right? Nope, nothing quite that clean. Not for me. My death? Well, it wasn't a battle. It wasn't a heroic final stand like some tragic queen of Shakespeare's imagination. It wasn't even a beautiful moment where I get to kiss the world goodbye with one last gasp of grandeur. No, the end I earned was a messy, self-inflicted collapse into irrelevance. That's the thing about living a life as big and as brutal as mine. Eventually, the universe catches up with you. And all the gold, all the power, all the lovers can't stop it. You want to know what it was really like? It was lonely. Let's set the scene. Antony and I were both broken, his forces defeated, his soul crushed. He wasn't the man who had once been the mighty warrior of Rome. He was just a man, a broken man who couldn't cope with failure. So he chose to leave this world on his own terms, and me. I was stuck in Alexandria, alone with the reality that I'd failed, that all the alliances, all the manipulation, all the lies hadn't done a damn thing to save me. The world outside was crumbling. Octavian had all but claimed Egypt as his own. And my empire, the empire I had fought so hard to build and protect, was slipping through my fingers. I had nothing left to give. My palace was silent. The courtiers who had once revered me now whispered behind my back. And all I had were the ghosts of what I had built and lost. I could have chosen a different path. I could have fled. I could have fled. I could have fled. I could have fled. Negotiated with Octavian. Begged for my life. For Egypt's survival. But what would that have meant? To live in shame. To live as someone else's puppet. No. I had been a queen my whole life. And I would go out as a queen, even if that meant choosing the only end that would make sense to me. My death was not a tragedy. It was my choice. It was a rebellion against everything that had gone wrong. So how did it happen? You've heard the stories. You've heard how I took the asp to my breast, how the venom of the snake crawled into my veins, and I became one with the fate I had tried to control for so long. The snake was my final act. My last gesture of defiance against a world that had humbled me. But here's the thing. It wasn't as grand as it sounds. It wasn't an elegant, poised act of self-sacrifice. It was the final, quiet resignation of a woman who had already seen it all slip away. And here's the most bitter part. No one really cared, at least not in the way I expected. There was no great outpouring of grief from my people. There was no monument built in my name. No grand funeral procession, no tearful speeches, no legacy. Instead, it was just another death, one in a long line of tragic royal suicides that history would eventually forget. They'd write my story, rewrite it, twist it, and make it all about my beauty, my lovers, and my fall from grace. The rest, lost to time. It's almost laughable when I think about it now. All that power, all that charm, all that cunning, and for what? A death that barely made an impact. A footnote in the rise of Rome. You think I had a grand legacy? You think I had the last laugh? The world would soon forget me, and my name would be reduced to myth, to legend. Just a beautiful, tragic woman, who had the world at her feet, and lost it all because she couldn't hold on to power. That's it. That's the end I earned. You want to know the hardest part of it all? It wasn't the betrayal, the war, the battles lost. It was knowing that I would be forgotten. Not for my intelligence, not for my strategy, not for the world I tried to create. Knowing I'd be remembered for my romance with Caesar and Antony. For the men who left their legacies in the wake of my fall. For the men who used me, manipulated me, and then walked away with their names intact while I became a legend of failure. But that's the thing about being a woman in power. You can never really win. Not in the eyes of history. They'll always reduce you to something you're not. They'll glorify the men around you, and then blame you when it all goes wrong. And that's how I ended up. In the end, I wasn't remembered for my achievements. I wasn't remembered for fighting to keep Egypt free, for ruling in the face of impossible odds. I wasn't remembered for being the woman who could never quite keep it together. The woman who tried to do too much and ended up with nothing. What did I earn? A death without glory. And as for my legacy, it was rewritten by the victors, by Octavian, by the Romans, who had no intention of remembering the queen who fought against them. That was my true end. Not a tragic romance. Not a tragic death. Just oblivion. What they say about me now. Ah, legacy. That thing everyone tells you is so important, isn't it? The mark you leave on the world. The story that gets told for generations. You'd think I'd have gotten a nice, glorious tribute when I died. Something worthy of a queen. Something fitting of all my grand efforts and all the power I wielded. But guess what? That's not how it works. That's not how it works. That's not how history remembers people. And now, after all these centuries, the world remembers me for all the wrong reasons. You see, in the end, they didn't build monuments in my honor. They didn't carve my name into the annals of time as a symbol of greatness. Instead, they turned me into a myth. A story, a convenient narrative. But that's not me. That's not the story I lived. You think it was just about sex and manipulation? No. You think it was just about love and tragedy? Try again. It was about survival. It was about doing whatever it took to keep my people free, to keep my empire intact. It was about holding the weight of Egypt on my shoulders, trying to keep it from crumbling under the pressure of the men who wanted to control it. But no, that's not what history tells. History doesn't tell the truth. It tells the convenient lie. Now let's talk about how they remember me today. It's laughable, really. You've heard the phrase Cleopatra, the woman who brought down two mighty men. Yeah, that's a nice little soundbite. But if you dig even a little deeper, you realize it's all superficial nonsense. They remember me for my relationships with men, for my beauty, for my supposed seduction of two of Rome's most powerful generals. That's the story they've stuck to for centuries, because let's face it, they can't handle the truth. The truth that I was a strategist, a survivor, a ruler who fought not for glory, but for the survival of my people. They don't want to see that. They want the myth, the fantasy. And as for my so-called romantic relationships, don't even get me started. It's absurd how people reduce my entire life to those two men.
Caesar and Antony. Really? That's what they remember?
The men who couldn't even hold their own empires together?
They were tools.
Useful, yes. But they weren't the reason I rose to power. They weren't the reason I stayed there. No, I didn't need them to be remembered. But of course that's what history cares about. How the great queen was tied to the men who supposedly made her rise. How clever of them, huh? And let's not forget the ironic part of all of this. How the Romans, those very men who saw me as a threat, are the ones who shaped my legacy. I didn't get to write my own story. They did. They made me into whatever they needed me to be. And they chose to turn me into the tragic woman, the unattainable beauty, the lost lover, the queen who tried too hard and lost everything. You think I wanted that? You think I wanted to be immortalized as a symbol of failure, of folly? No. But that's what the world remembers. The pretty tragic woman who couldn't make it in the end. I guess it's easier to remember a woman as a myth than a person, easier to turn her into an idea than to really understand her. Because if people understood me, if they truly saw the lengths I went to just to stay on that throne, to keep Egypt standing, they might have a different story to tell. But that's not what happened. They saw what they wanted to see, and they still do. And now, here I am. Cleopatra. The woman who loved too much. The woman who rose too high. The woman who couldn't handle the fall, or so they say. Because the truth is more complicated. But history doesn't care about truth. It never does. You want to know what they say about me now? They say I'm a myth, a symbol, a woman who had it all and lost it in the end. They say I was beautiful. They say I was tragic. They say I loved the wrong men. But the one thing they'll never say I was a queen who fought for something greater than herself. They'll never say I was more than the story they tell. And that's how they remember me. Would you still trade places? So here we are at the end of this little tale. You've heard the highs and the lows, the manipulations, the victories, and the inevitable fall. You've heard about my ambition, my love, my power, and how all of it slipped through my fingers. Now let me ask you, would you still trade places? Oh, I know what you're thinking. Sitting there in your comfortable seat, reading my story, all eager to step into my sandals and feel what it's like to rule an empire, to command armies, to bask in the adoration of thousands. You think it'd be glorious, don't you? You think it'd be all gowns, gold, and men falling at your feet. What a nice fairy tale. But trust me, darling, you're not ready. Would you still trade places with me after hearing the truth? Would you still want to wear the crown when you realize that every waking moment is consumed by paranoia, betrayal, and fear of losing everything? Sure, the power feels great at first, but then the weight of it hits you, the crushing pressure to always be on, always perform, always please. You're not a person anymore. You're a symbol, an idea, and when the world loves you, they expect you to be perfect. When the world hates you, they drag your name through the mud. Oh, don't get me wrong, I had my moments of glory. There were times when I felt unstoppable, when I thought I could do anything, bend the world to my will. But for every high there was a low. For every victory there was a price to pay. And every step I took toward greatness pulled me further into a pit of loneliness, of doubt, of fear. Because you see, the higher you climb, the harder the fall. So would you really want my life? Sure, you'd get to wear the crown. You'd get to make the grand speeches and seduce the most powerful men of the time. You'd get to sit at the head of the table, ruling an empire. But you'd also have to constantly look over your shoulder, wondering who's plotting against you, who's out to take your throne, and who's pretending to be your friend just so they can use you. You'd have to live every day like it's a battle, with your heart in your throat, wondering when the next betrayal will come. And when it finally does, when it all falls apart, you'll be left standing in the rubble, wondering what went wrong. And then, in the final moments after everything's crumbled, you'll realize the one truth you never wanted to face. You never had control. You never controlled the empire. You never controlled your lovers. You never controlled fate. So yeah, go ahead, picture yourself in my shoes. Imagine the power, the luxury, the fame. But when you're there, in the middle of it all, remember this, you will never be free. Not truly. You'll always be trapped by the very thing you think you want. And when it's all over, when you've fought your last battle and made your last play, you'll be left with nothing but a shattered legacy. A legacy that the world will rewrite for you, turning your story into whatever fits their narrative. Would you still trade places with me? Would you still want this crown, the glory, the tragedy, the fall? I leave that up to you.